After a long, uncertain wait that left some doubting whether it would ever happen, a la Pokemon Z, Pokemon Home has not gone the way of Zygarde and has, in fact, finally come around. And boy, has it shaken the metagame up. The additions it has unleashed are not just many, but highly impactful, which has led to the early stages of Gen 9 OU's new form to be both utterly chaotic and difficult to recognize compared to its previous stage. It's an exciting time as these new Pokemon have been known to exist for a while, and everyone has been eager to try them out. In this video, we'll be highlighting the most drastic changes, Pokemon that have changed or have been added in the most significant ways, whether they've been nerfed or improved. In other words, just like we did in the beginning of the generation, we're going over the winners and losers of this new meta, this time that of Pokemon Home. Since its introduction in Generation 4, Toxic has been a significant part of what has made Heatran so consistently difficult and irritating to deal with. With Fire Stab ensuring Steels don't want to come anywhere near it, and OU's few Poison types generally not wanting to take it either, Heatran is free to catch switch-ins like Waters, Dragons, Tyranitar, and Blissey, as well as other fires in the later generations, with Toxic impeding their ability to deal with it, especially with Heatran's famous Sand Immune, Bulk Heavy, Protect bolstered longevity, making it particularly adept at wearing the opposition down. Dealing with Heatran is so challenging in part because to deal with it, you don't need to just be able to take its powerful hits. You have to stand up to those and status. This restricts options quite a bit. Now in Generation 9, Toxic has been removed from Heatran's move pool, and in doing so has taken one of its best tools in executing both its offensive and defensive duties. Heatran is still an excellent Pokemon, of course. It's not like Toxic was an intrinsic part of its viability, but it's a major blow nevertheless. Of course, Heatran can still dish out effectively crippling status with burns from either Lava Plume or Will-O-Wisp, but this as its only option is limiting. It was better pre-Gen 7, where it compensated for the fact that it did increase over time with a more immediate pressure compared to Toxic, since it dished out 12.5% per turn right from the start, but then Sun and Moon nerfed Burn to 6.25% per turn, meaning it didn't even put on immediate pressure anymore. This is not to say that Burn is something to scoff at, as passive damage is always good, and having the attack stat limits what Pokemon can effectively switch into it, but when it's Heatran's only option for status, dealing with it becomes far easier, as Pokemon like Blissey and special attacking Pokemon that resist fire become far less threatened by it, well, barring Terastallization, which Heatran is unnatural at using to its strongest effect, much like it did with Gen 7 Z moves. But just like with Z Crystals, it comes at the cost of not being able to Terra another one of your Pokemon, which is far more limiting as an option than that of previous generations, which could potentially be solved as quickly and easily as slapping on the also now removed Hidden Power. Even in Gen 7, Heatran didn't need to run a Z Crystal, because it could cover so much so easily with Toxic, turning would-be answers without the move into pokes you really didn't want switching into it with the move. And as a result of this widespread value, Toxic was incredibly common on it to the point of being nearly mandatory when not running a Z Crystal, as it was such a huge part of why it was so tough to deal with. Of course, Heatran still has a million other amazing qualities going for it, and it's still a fantastic Pokemon, but losing Toxic is a big enough change to qualify it for this list, as it changes how it plays and how it can be dealt with in a major way. Still, compared to the number 2 and number 1 losers on this list, Heatran got off pretty easy. Samurott has been a strong lower tier Pokemon ever since its introduction in Generation 5, but Pokemon Home's addition of its Hisuian form, first glimpsed in Legends Arceus, has vaulted it to immediate OU stardom. Hisuian Samurott trades a small portion of its Unova form's bulk for a significant increase in offensive pressure. Its meager base 70 speed is now a solid base 85, and its base attack and special attack have been swapped. Its attack stat sitting at base 108 is now the higher of the two, which goes well with its access to Swords Dance. Samurott has also gained secondary stab with its newfound partial dark typing. And what dark stab move does it use? Well, it gets Sucker Punch, which is amazing, but that's not exactly spammable given how it fails on the Switch. However, it is actually this more spammable dark stab that's the best part of all. Hisuian Samurott's signature move, Ceaseless Edge, isn't going to bowl anyone over with its power, as at base 65, its strength is equivalent to knockoff against a Pokemon without an item. Not bad, but far from earth-shattering. Why is it such a big deal? deal then? Because Ceaseless Edge also sets a layer of spikes. Yes, that's right. Forget Greninja, which was a terrific offensive Pokemon using the switches it forced to set spikes. Here we have a Pokemon which sets spikes while attacking with its stab. You could theoretically make the call that Greninja would use spikes instead of blasting you with Dark Pulse and stay in to punish it, but this doesn't exist against Hisuian Samurai, which is going to use Ceaseless Edge no matter what without risk in a complete win-win scenario. This makes it one of the best offensive Pokemon around for the invaluable support it brings so effortlessly. As a result, it has been spammed a lot and to great effect since home release, especially since it's not just an offensive spikes machine, but a threat in its own right, bolstered further by Sacred Sword coverage, ever-reliable Water Stab, and of course the game-ending potential of Swords Dance and Sucker Punch. Terra Dark makes it even nastier since its power boost makes Ceaseless Edge even easier to spam as if it wasn't already, and really elevates Sucker Punch to terrifying levels. Overall, Hisuian Samurai has been a majorly defining factor in the early home metagame and makes heavy duty boots even more essential to run, unless you want to get hacked apart by the spikes it sets so easily while doing damage at that. Landorus Therian, darling of the OU metagame since its introduction in Black and White 2, has been dealt several massive blows which severely impact its ability to support its team to the extent it has in previous generations. Of course, it is still Lando T with amazing typing and stats and Intimidate and Stealth Rock and U-Turn and Stab Earthquake, etc. But it has lost multiple cornerstones of what comprised its role in Generation 8. The pure utility approach it adopted post Hidden Power. In Generation 9, it has lost all of Toxic, Knockoff, and Defog. These moves are some of the best in the game, integral to the function of key defensive Pokemon like Lando T, and losing them severely limits its reach in terms of the support it can provide once it hits the field. Its move pool has become comparatively bland. It's still a great Pokemon, of course, but relative to its previous self, it's definitely been knocked down a peg. Just losing Defog would have been fine, as Lando T had plenty of support possibilities that didn't revolve around removing hazards, so much so that Defog often didn't even find its way into its moveset. With heavy-duty boots being more prominent than ever, Defog is needed even less. What did always find its way into Lando T's moveset though were these other support moves, those that actually struck the opponent and hindered them in some way, which was why Lando T was so obnoxious to deal with once it hit the field. But without Toxic and Knockoff, this is no longer the case either. One would be hard-pressed to call Lando T outright passive, as U-turning into its teammates will ensure that will never quite be the case, but it sure is enabling those teammates more than putting pressure on by itself, whereas it used to be able to do both. Now one can deal with Landorus Therian itself much more easily, unperturbed by the crippling loss of longevity and utility that would come with being toxic or having one's item removed by knockoff, more easily than ever before in fact. And so Lando T's comparative lack of utility earns it its place on this list. In the same generation Weavile has been nerfed to unviability, a new member of the family rises to freshly terrorize the OU metagame. Sneasler, the evolution of Hisuian Sneasel, packs a blistering base 130 attack and 120 speed alongside fighting poison typing, which provides a surprising deal of longevity with a resistance to Stealth Rock and immunity to Toxic, as well as a ferociously complementary stab combination. Fairy types won't want to switch into Sneasler's brutally strong close combat for fear of its poison stab Dire Claw, while Steels won't want to try to stuff Dire Claw lest they get wiped off the map by close combat. What makes Sneasler's attacks even nastier to deal with is its Poison Touch ability, which gives it a 30% chance to poison anything its attack makes contact with. This is incredibly high and makes pivoting around its attacks incredibly punishing. Sure, you can try and dance around it with Resist, but it's probably going to leave you with at least one poison, or rather at least one status, since in addition to the 30% poison rate from Poison Touch, Dire Claw also has an absolutely stunning 50% chance to sleep, paralyze, or poison the target. As if that wasn't enough, Sneasler can also slap U-turn onto its moveset. Yeah, a U-turn that can poison the opponent. Then late in the game, it can simply Swords Dance up and shred through everything. That is, if it's not going for the immediate brutal damage of Choice Band. Speaking of, Sneasler has some tremendous support options too, mostly ruining walls instantly with the transfer of a choice item through Switcheroo. It can get nasty ability against defense with Taunt as well, and can even opt for Toxic Spites if it likes. Sneasler is a controversial Pokemon at the time of this video, with many clamoring for its ban. Regardless of how that ends up, it is a tremendous Pokemon, incredibly arduous to deal with, bringing even more success to the Weavile family. In Generation 5, Kyurem Black made history by being the first ever cover legend to drop to OU. In Generation 8, there was talk of Zamazenta potentially joining it in that category, but it never came to fruition. With the release of Pokemon Home though, that idea has been realized, and both Zamazenta and its crown form have been dropped from their previous place in Ubers to the standard OU metagame. Even though Zamazenta Crown was banned quite quickly for a cover legendary, supposedly the quintessential example of power level too high for standard play, to even be tried in OU speaks to a mighty hath fallen sentiment, earning it the #1 place on this list. Zamazenta itself remains controversial at the time of this video, but hasn't immediately rattled the metagame to sufficient levels, yet anyway. So why did they drop to begin with? Well, with the massive terrestrialization influenced power creep of Generation 9, the base 120 attack stat of both Zamazenta forms isn't exactly impressive. Sure, they're incredibly fast, but they're not shattering the metagame because their close combat is too strong or too fast, or both. Zamazenta Crown actually wound up being too much for the metagame because of its newfound access to body press, which alongside Iron Defense and its one-time +1 defense boost from Dauntless Shield turned it into a one-hit KO machine, made particularly egregious by its great defensive typing, amazing special bulk which let it take hits on the other side of the spectrum as well, and blazing base 128 speed. Still, the fact that Rusted Shield wasn't a banned item on Zamazenta a la Soldu on the Laddie Twins in Generations 4 and 5, and the fact that Zamazenta Crown wasn't even close to the first thing banned in Home is a testament to its impact on OU not being as obviously excessively mighty as it might have been before. As for Zamazenta, it's like a watered down version of its crown form, lacking its amazing bulk and secondary steel typing, so it's even less threatening, hence its current lack of ban. It remains to be seen if it'll be too much or not, but even if it does wind up getting banned, the fact that it took as long as it did to do so, alongside it dropping in the first place, means it has thoroughly deserved its place on this list. When Regieleki was introduced in Generation 8, everyone's first reaction was one of fear. A speed stat that left Deoxys speed in the dust, an ability that provided a built-in life orb for its electric stab, and in addition to an already strong Thunderbolt, another terrifying form of electric stab, Electro Ball, whose strength was drawn off how much faster it was than the opponent. Ideal for the fastest Pokemon in the game. Oh, and it also had Volt Switch, so it can maintain momentum while still safely stinging the opponent. Throw a life orb or magnet on this thing, and it really dropped everything in sight. However, Regieleki also had one gigantic flaw, which basically rendered all we just listed worthless. The fact that it was completely and utterly unable to touch the ground types that were immune to its electric type terror. Everyone lamented how ridiculously brutal it had been if introduced in a generation with hidden power. And then in Generation 9, they basically got a super powered version of that concept with the additions of Terrestrialization and Terra Blast, which provided Regieleki with a stronger version of hidden power that it also received stab on. It would Terra Ice, and with a hilariously over-the-top version of the classic Bolt Beam coverage, effortlessly tore through the grounds, grasses, and dragons that would resist electric, leaving it free to tear through everything else with its electric stab. Regieleki was so good, it didn't matter that terrestrializing it was limiting in that it prevented you from terrestrializing something else. What else would you want to Terra when this terror existed? It was also so good, it didn't matter that the opponent knew exactly what Terra it was going to be. It ripped everything to shreds anyway with sheer strength and speed. Regieleki finally realized its potential and was so absurdly overpowered that it was banned pretty much instantly upon the release of Pokemon Home, and as a result, it is more than deserving of its top tier status on this list. And that's it. With the number of new additions brought about by Pokemon Home, notably bringing the mainline version of Pokemon introduced in Legends Arceus, this list was difficult to narrow down, and others definitely could have been mentioned. Most notably, we'll give a shout out to Enamorus, who has basically been a Togekiss on steroids and how it's threatened the OU metagame thus far, especially when terrestrializing ground. And if you have any other Pokemon you think could have been mentioned, be they Basculegion, Ursaluna, Overqwil, Cleavor, or anything else, feel free to mention them in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. And as always, if you like the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos. And thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.